The songs that I'm going to share with you today are from the first demo session that I did once I landed in Los Angeles. There are several songs on the session. I'm just going to play two of them for you today, and we'll get to some others in later videos. I got this particular demo session through an association with Billy Preston. So here's the backstory. It was 1976, September 21st, my 21st birthday, when I left Livonia, Michigan to go move to Los Angeles, California. And I moved with Phil and Mark. Phil, later the bass player in 707, and Mark, our mutual friend, a guitarist and a singer. We ended up living together in a little ramshackle house by the corner of Santa Monica and Vermont, on Lockwood Avenue. Not a great neighborhood, but fortunately the landlord was willing to rent to three guys who didn't have jobs. Well, pretty quickly, Mark and Phil ended up with jobs at the LA Country Club doing security. And I ended up working for a local catalog showroom doing retail work as Christmas help. So one day, Mark and Phil came home and said that they had heard that there was going to be an open audition for a choir, and they were both really good singers. And the choir was being assembled by none other than Billy Preston. So they decided that they were going to go and audition, and I decided I was going to go along just for the fun of it. The auditions were being held at SIR, Studio Instrument Rentals, in downtown Hollywood, and it was in a large airplane hangar type of place where Billy could rehearse his whole band and get the lighting and the sound and everything right before he went out touring. On this particular occasion, he was holding auditions there in that room, and when we walked in, Mark and Phil signed in, got in line to go audition as singers, and I was just at loose ends. I decided to just find a place to sit. Now, there were several little leather couches scattered around what would have been sort of the main viewing floor, and I saw a couch that just had an old fella sitting there on it, so I went over and sat down next to him. Well, that fella turned out to be Billy Preston's dad. And from where we were sitting, there was a couch up by the stage with a fellow with a giant afro who I assumed must be Billy Preston. The band was all up on the stage, and one of Billy's keyboard players was handling the auditions. Well, as the auditions were going forward, I struck up a conversation with Billy's dad, and he started telling me these remarkable stories about how he was at Abbey Road Studios in London and how he had met the Beatles. And he was telling me stories and opinions of the different encounters he had had with different members of the Beatles, and it was just fascinating to listen to. So anyway, auditioner after auditioner is going up, and I saw that there were two drum sets up on the platform. And so as they were auditioning singers, they began auditioning drummers. I didn't know that they were going to be auditioning drummers that night, but apparently Billy had decided that for these series of local concerts that he was going to do, that he wanted this choir for, he also wanted two drummers. At the time, Manuel Kellough was Billy's regular drummer. And Manuel, this guy was a rock. I mean, this guy just played time. He was like a giant metronome. And I really enjoyed how he could find the pocket of a song and just hang there. And I was watching all these various young drummers getting up to audition. I guess there were maybe 4 or 5. And they'd each get up to audition, and then they would madly overplay, which is a problem with most musicians when they're auditioning for a gig they really want. Unfortunately, they end up playing everything they ever learned or ever knew, and they kind of blow the audition by overplaying. And that was happening to drummer after drummer. And I really couldn't figure it out. I couldn't understand it. Why would these guys get up there and then overplay so badly? Well, after the drummer auditions were over, the fellow who was handling the auditions said, "Are there any other drummers here that have come to audition?" And I did not raise my hand. Instead, it was Billy's dad that raised his hand, pointed at me and said, "This guy, he's a drummer." In the course of our conversation, I had told him that I had just moved there from Detroit and that my friends and I were going to try to make a career out of music and that I was a drummer, and here was Billy's dad prompting me to go up and play. So I did, and I figured out what was happening to the previous drummers that had auditioned. I went up and I sat down, and Manuel said to me, "You take the fills." Apparently he had said that to every drummer that went up there. Well, I had been sitting there all night listening to Manuel. And he, like I said, was a rock. I mean, when he played, it was undeniable where the time was. He was just boom, thwap, boom, thwap, boom, thwap. I mean, just steady, even. And knowing that he was the drummer that Billy Preston had picked, I thought, well, that's what Billy wants. He doesn't want all this show-off stuff. He doesn't want all this fancy playing stuff. He wants somebody who just plays time, boom, thwap, boom, thwap. And I thought, that's what I'm going to do. So when Manuel turned to me and said, "You take the fills," I said, "No, you take them." So we start playing. We fall right into the pocket together. Boom, thwap, both of us just knocking out time. Bass player looks back at me and smiles. The band locks in and we start playing. And for the first time the whole evening, Billy jumps up from the couch, makes his way up to his clavinet, and suddenly it's thwack-a-whack-a-boom-a-whack-a-boom-a-whack, in the clavinet sound. And suddenly Billy's playing and dancing a bit. And I'm thinking, wow, he's really enjoying this. Well, sure enough, his manager comes over and says, "Look, here's the deal. We're going to be doing 5 local shows, all here in Los Angeles. And that's what the choir and the extra drummer's for. Would you like to come play them? There's no money in it, but you get to say that you played with Billy Preston for a little while, and we're going to do these shows. Would you like to do them?" Well, of course. I've only been in Los Angeles a couple of months, and I'm going to take that gig immediately. So then, the shows.
Or lease in the morning.
The whole group, the band, the choir, myself, only got a couple of rehearsals before we did the series of shows there in Los Angeles. But the show that stands out to me was the one that we did in MacArthur Park in the band shell there. It was really well attended, and we did the show in the late afternoon. Mark, my roommate, even got to sing a solo song, so that's pretty cool. And I'm up there playing with Billy Preston. I've only been in Los Angeles for a couple of months, and I'm starting to think, why doesn't everybody do this? You move to LA, you meet famous people, you play music. I had no idea how much hard work lay ahead of me. But sitting up there on the platform in the bandshell in MacArthur's Park in the late afternoon, I was looking out over the landscape. Now, MacArthur Park has a lot of weeping willows, big green hanging down trees. And as I was sitting up there playing and gazing out over the park, the sun was going down. And I swear to you, MacArthur's Park was melting in the dark. Suddenly that song, one of my favorite songs from Jimmy Webb, suddenly made sense to me. MacArthur's Park looked like it was melting in the dark because all of these weeping willow trees looked like cakes left out in the rain, and they looked like sweet green icing flowing down. And suddenly that whole song made sense to me. I think that's why that particular show stands out to me. So I played the 5 shows, and it was really good fun. And after that, Manuel actually invited me down to watch Billy and his band rehearse because they were getting ready to go on the road. When I showed up there to watch the rehearsal, Manuel actually invited me to come up behind his drums, this gigantic clear 5s drum set that he had. He asked me to come up, and he kind of laughed and pointed at me to come and play. And since all the musicians knew me and Billy knew me, I got up there and tried to play Manuel's kit, which for a guy my size, his kit was very large and intimidating, and he played with sticks the size of tree trunks, so I sat back there and did my best, but at least I get to say that for a moment I got to play with Billy and the band. So I'm at home one day and the phone rings. It's a fellow who introduces himself as Alfred McCrary. He tells me that he's gotten my phone number from Manuel Kellough. It turns out that Manuel's wife is also a McCrary. The McCrarys are a family gospel R&B group, and they're getting ready to go into A&M Studios to cut some demos. Well, some of my favorite artists recorded at A&M Studios. I was one of those guys who, when I got records, I would read the jackets, I would read everything about it, who produced it, who played on it, who's the engineer, and where was it recorded. So when he tells me that he's going to be recording at A&M and says, Manuel can't make it, they're getting ready to go on the road, so he gave me your number and said that you would come and play. Well, I couldn't have been more thrilled to go and play on this particular demo session. That day, we cut, I think, 6 tracks altogether. I didn't get to hear the vocal tracks. Alfred just showed me how the song went. Phil Kekeoran, who became a friend of mine through that session, was playing guitar. I don't remember the piano player's name, but we got together and we laid out the tracks one afternoon at A&M, and I was just thrilled to be at A&M Studios, where so many of my heroes had recorded. So anyway, I played the parts, I hoped it was any good, and then I left. And then Alfred contacted me and said that they had finished singing and mixing it, asked me if I wanted a copy, a cassette of what we had worked on, and I said, yes, absolutely. That's the cassette that I lifted these songs off of. We played a couple more times together. We rehearsed a couple more times, and we're planning to do a couple more demos together, and then the McCrarys got their record deal. In fact, their first single had Stevie Wonder playing on it. I didn't get to play on the sessions for the album, but that's a story I'll say for another video, because that's kind of an interesting backstory as well. So here are a couple of songs from the McCrarys, and I hope you enjoy them. It was really fun getting to play this kind of music in that location, and really fun to know that I got it through Manuel Kellough. And thanks very much, Manuel. You're a good guy.
Sleep for thinking to be together. We'll give love, share love. We're gonna be so happy. Thinking about you, 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 thinking about you,
Smiling is all that I can do. Ever since I gave my heart to you.
Never thought I'd live to see this day when anyone could make me feel this way. When I met you, my dreams were all fulfilled, and now my life is going straight uphill. You are the music of my life, and the melody so nice. You are the symphony of my heart. It's been like heaven from the start, and I know we'll never part. Can't you see how happy you've made me?
Smiling, our love was meant to be. Can't you see how happy you made me?
Of all the ones I've met in my lifetime, you're the one I want to make you mine. When I met you, my dreams were all fulfilled. Now my life is going straight uphill. You are the music of my life, and the melody so nice. You are the symphony of my heart. It's been like heaven from the start, and I know we'll never part. Can't you see how happy you've made me? You are the music of my life, and the melody so nice. You are the symphony of my heart. It's been like heaven from the start, and I know we'll never part. Can't you see how happy you've made me? You are the music of my life, and the melody